In this video, I'm going to share with you all the details of how to get the most out of the GIF compressor. Now, I'm going to articulate all this out. Now, when you're actually doing this should take only a minute or so. But let's just get real clear on how to take advantage of this. So what I've done is I've downloaded a GIF animation from jiffy.com. And I tried to do something that gave me the ability to kind of utilize everything in all the features. So this is a GIF animation of a guy on a paddleboard going over a cliff or a waterfall. Looks like fun. And the first way that you can potentially optimize or make your GIF animation download faster is through cropping. And so that's what we start off with. We have a cropping feature here. And so what I can do is if I analyze this video, I can look at it and go, okay, well, the central motion or the thing I'm mainly focusing in is the paddleboarder. Well, from the beginning, he starts off up here and he comes down here. That means I can kind of crop off some of the right-hand side and the bottom without really losing the essential point of this animation. So I'm going to do that already. And I always try to keep it even when I do that. And so when I do that, my original file size, by the way, for this was 5.2 megabytes. I should have shown that to you, but trust me, it is. And so 5.2 megabytes. It's a very big download. Now, of course, if you're on a fast connection, that's not that big of a deal. Wi-Fi and that kind of thing is going to see that without any problem. The reason why we're doing this GIF compression is for those on mobile devices or with slow connections. It's basically to broaden the audience, the potential audience of this GIF animation. If you're only going to assume that only people on Wi-Fi are going to watch this, then you're basically saying I'm going to cut my potential market, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of half if given how many people are going to be on mobile when they see this. So now I've done some other stuff here. You'll see here that this is, I tested this before. The original, this is all the original settings at 100% at 374 by 212, 10 frames per second, 256 colors. But I want to show you here first what that first adjustment gave us. So right away, cropping a little bit off went from 5.2 megabytes to 2.4 megabytes. So it's a very substantial savings right off the bat if we crop something off. Now, a lot of times you can't crop it. Sometimes you might be able to, though, scale or resize it. If you're doing an ad and it's say 350 by 250, you might consider a 250 by 250. If you can get the same impact of the content in the video, in the animation, then you want to do a smaller file size if you can, if it's something that you can adjust in your design and so forth. But if they're doing something like this, which is probably for social, Facebook or something like that, sharing on an instant message or something, this is the size doesn't really matter. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and pop it down to 90%. Let's take a look at what that does for our savings, our file size. So now we're down to 2 megabytes. So that cut it down 0.4 megabytes. I know that, as you saw, I had it at 85. So let's just do it at 85. Let's see what that does. So we're at 1.8 megabytes. And I'm going to go down. Now the frame rate is a completely different thing. So you may not be able to take off the size or crop, but you can usually take off some frames per second. So in this case, I found with a little bit of experimentation that I could go down to 7 frames a second without it really feeling like it was jumpy or, it really made that much difference from the original. So I'm going to go ahead and preview that, and I'm down to 1.2 megabytes. I basically am always trying to get down to about a megabyte for my download, because that on even a slow connection generally downloads fast enough, or at least downloads fast enough so people don't scroll past it before they see it or move on before they see it. So the last thing I can adjust is colors. So again, we started off with the ability to crop or resize and or both, and take away frames per second. By the way, when it takes away frames per second, the actual number of frames per second is sort of spread out. So in other words, if I cut it, say it was at 10 frames a second and they were all 0.1 second, then if I cut it down to 5, then each of the frames would then be 0.2 in terms of their duration. So that's how that works. It tries to preserve the original overall duration by adjusting the time frame of the in-between frames, if that makes sense. So let's finally go to the number of colors. One thing that's unique about Video ToolChest's GIF compressor is most GIF compression tools constrain your number of colors to a specific either 128, 64, 32, and so forth. But we can do any number. So that actually can really help. So for example, let's just do something like, let's do 170 colors and see what that does for us. So now we're down to 1.1, but I'm going to go, I happen to know I experimented with this. I can get it down to about 128 colors, and it's still pretty much the same because of the texture in the water and on the cliffside there, that vegetation. It pretty much means no dithering is necessary because it's already kind of rough. And dithering would normally be used if there's solid colors, and then reducing the number of colors makes them more stark and creates sort of splotchiness. So I'm going to go 120 colors is fine, so let's preview that. And now we're down to that 1 megabyte file size that I really think that you really should try to be gunning for, at least, if not lower, if you can. And of course, if I needed dithering, I could add it, but in this case, I don't need it in terms of, try to maintain the visual quality. Generally, when you add dither, it adds to the file size. So you might want to try to compensate with one of these options if you can. But those are all of the options. Now, when you export, there's actually one more that happens automatically, and that's sort of called interframe transparency, or there's also called lossy transparency, where anything that is the same between frames is sort of made transparent. In this case, it's very unlikely that very much of that was occurring, because when the animation changes entirely from the beginning to the end, it can't do that. But just be aware that there is one additional automatic compression that happens that is important also, and helps you with the file size as well. So anyways, there we are, 1 megabyte file with your 4 main things to do: cropping, resizing, reducing the number of frames per second, and the number of colors. And I always like to do them in that order because if I get down to 1 megabyte before ever reducing the colors, and I don't want to reduce the colors. Similarly, if I get down to 1 megabyte having sized it down, then I'm going to go ahead and leave the frames per second, because if I'm in that 1 megabyte range already, because it just preserves the quality just a little bit more. So I don't want to have to take away from, even subtly from the quality of the animation if I don't have to. So that's why I like to do those other ones first. So hopefully that helps you get the most out of the GIF compressor tool in Video ToolChest.